In a small provincial estate, surrounded only by a dense green forest and the sun illuminating the lawns around the house, a child was born. The gods bestowed blessings on the young lady and rewarded her with great happiness, namely, that they had a boy. The baby was tiny, but looked like it already had the personality traits of the homeowner, and then the assistant asked the couple if they had chosen a name yet. The woman, who had just given the world a tiny baby, looked exhausted and even with sweat still dripping down her face, said that his name was Ruin Ardell. She looks at her child as if at some heavenly creature, and with confidence, yet anxiety, says that she hopes he will become the light of this world. Ruin Ardell, from a young age, grew up on an estate and was raised by loving parents, but from childhood he did not stand out as being particularly talented. Sitting on the floor, he overhears his father and his assistant talking about how he should try to get them good seafood, and the owner can have no doubt about that. Suddenly, the child calls out to his Uncle Baggins, which causes him to look surprised, so he asks what happened to the young gentleman. The boy almost begs him, but says that he can't go outside at the foot of the southern mountain, because there was a strange flow of mana there. Baggins looks at the young gentleman's father and doesn't understand what this could mean, but he himself doesn't know what his son is talking about. The weather was incredibly bad. The sky was covered with black clouds, and the rain was pouring so heavily that you could hardly see anything around you. The owner of the house opens the door and sees Uncle Baggins running towards the house, and says that he is starting to worry because a lot of time has passed. Entering the room, he apologizes and explains that he chose the longer route, and the man immediately, looking at the emotions of his interlocutor, asks what happened. He explains that he managed to escape trouble because he listened to the young master's advice, and the master doesn't understand what his son is doing here. So Baggins replies that because of his words yesterday, he did not cross the street at the foot of the South Mountain, and thereby saved himself. After all, I just found out that there was an attack by beastmen there, and then the man's eyes were incredibly alarmed because it was impossible to believe. And everyone who was there was in danger, but thanks to the young man, the uncle was not among them, and one could even say that the little boy saved him from death. They both thought for a moment, but Uncle Baggins broke the silence and asked the master if he thought Ruin Ardell could sense the mana floating in the air, but the master replied that it was hard to say. Suddenly he seems to be lost in his thoughts, thinking about the question his interlocutor asked him, and can't even think of further actions if that's the case. But everything was already clear. Ruin would be Ardell's future, and from that day on, he increasingly showed a talent for magic, and already at 6 he felt mana, and at 7 he could show it. When he was 10, the representative of the first-year students gave his opening remarks and asked everyone around to congratulate the best among the applicants, Ruin Ardell. After all, the young man surpassed the large number of children from wealthy families who entered the Ignite Magic Academy because it was the best in the Radiant Kingdom. Therefore, Ruin was ranked as the best applicant among all the others and received the title of genius. In his eyes there was a misunderstanding and the thought of what he could achieve in the future. However, he did not really like this attitude, but he was reassured by the fact that his name would raise the status of his family. However, it cannot be said that he succeeded in this, and the teacher asks him to show the skills of the best among the applicants, hinting at Ruin and challenging him to come forward. And right then, on the first day of classes, when Ruin was taking the tests, it was clear that he was far from the best, and not even second on the list. Because when he was showing off his skills, the teacher asked to release them faster, but the boy shouted that he simply could not physically do what he was asking. His gaze was focused on power, but Ruin's thoughts couldn't understand what had gone wrong as he had planned, so he continued to try to do at least something. The applicants waiting for their turn looked at Ruin Ardell and looked shocked by the reality that was happening around them, because they had heard that he was the best. The young man realized that he lacked the innate ability to release magic even a meter away from his body, and this was what was called mana release disorder. Tears rolled down Ruin's cheeks, because he understood that for a mage, his body was terrible, and this despair was visible in the emotions swirling in his eyes. But it didn't take long for others to learn of his humble origins and lack of talent for magic, and that disappointed him even more. And it was because of this news that the other students' attitude towards Ruin changed too quickly, and he felt that others treated him poorly. He was walking down the corridor and touched the hand of a student walking in front of him, but suddenly Ruin's face twisted in confusion because he knew what was about to happen. The friend of the one the young man had touched began to look closely at his hand and ask if everything was okay, as if he had caught some kind of infection. He explains his emotions by saying that the student touched a disabled person, calling him Ruin, and could become one himself, and the student understands that he needs to wash up quickly so that nothing gets on his skin. Ruin Ardell knows that he is called a person who cannot use his magic, so this situation around him is familiar to him like no one else. He was well aware that others considered him a defective person, unable to cast a single spell even in a magic academy. For the envious and the ordinary students, Ruin's current status became the highest source of malicious satisfaction they could possibly imagine. And so the student he had touched stood before him and boldly asked why the young man was looking so impudently, having the courage, even though he was incapable of even using magic. Just then, the fist of an angry rival flies with all its force straight into Ruin Ardell's face, seeking to humiliate him in front of everyone and show his level in the academy. The young gentleman stands, his hands firmly resting against the cold wall of the establishment, as if trying to keep his balance and hide his fatigue from being humiliated by everyone around him. Holding his bruised and swollen eye, he aches in his heart and wonders whether he will ever be able to fulfill his dream of becoming a real magician and whether the bullying around him will ever end. After all, it was Ruin Ardell who once entered the academy with the highest scores and was considered more promising than any of his peers and applicants to the institution in general. Therefore, he worked harder than anyone, pushing himself beyond limits to prove himself worthy of the title of the academy's best student and to glorify his name. But due to a curse, the young man, who was once considered a true genius and the best student, became disabled in terms of his ability to wield magic. Therefore, Ardell thinks that this is how, unfortunately, his story at this academy ended, namely, ingloriously and painfully, leaving behind only the shadow of his former hopes and dreams. Ruin remained alone, silently watching the students around him cheerfully chatting with each other, as if completely forgetting about his existence. But he knew well that behind the friendly smiles and loud laughter lurked gossip and condemnation directed specifically at him. The young gentleman only thought that everything would end exactly as it did, as if fate had been preparing this bitter ending for him from the very beginning. After all, the boy could not even imagine that he would one day find himself in such a hopeless situation, where his dreams of magic would be shattered to pieces. That in the abyss of despair he is slowly drowning, losing his last strength and hope to escape the darkness that is consuming his life. And yet Ruin Ardell never imagined that even in the depths of despair, there would be a place for a miracle that could change his fate against all odds. The young gentleman seemed to be in some dimension, not understanding what was happening around him. His eyes were closed, and his body seemed to have left him and separated on a spiritual level, but outwardly nothing had changed. Having come to himself, Ruin mentally asks where he is and what is happening, but the feeling is as if he is underwater, at a very deep level. Suddenly, the voice that previously said the status window was unlocked and the player artifact was activated says that the young man is the incarnation of Drak, the destroyer of worlds. The young man looks at the man in front of him and doesn't understand what he's saying or how his eyes can shine with such a blinding red light. Ruin mentally asks himself if this is really a dream, but realizes that it is too realistic for a dream, and he feels that way. He continues to watch the person in front of him, and it seems like the person is trying to tell him something, or perhaps explain something. The boy's eyes gradually acquire a rich red hue, shining with an alarming light, as if a harbinger of inevitable changes. And then, After a certain time, they become completely bright red, as if a flame has ignited in them that will never go out. Sometime before this situation, events took place on the territory of the Ignite Academy training ground. At this moment, Professor Heidel loudly calls Ruin Ardell to him, and a silence falls around, filled with tension and anticipation. The teacher explains that, as previously explained, the young man only needs to create a fiery sphere and hit the scarecrow standing in front of him with it. After all, the fiery sphere is the magic that any student must master flawlessly. But for someone who is unable to use magic, it is an almost impossible task. And then Ruin Ardell wonders if he will be able to complete this seemingly easy task this time, which is beyond his power. Professor Heidel, observing his pupil and seeing doubt and even confusion in his eyes, begins to speed up his actions. The young man, having gathered himself, says to himself that he doesn't need to give up, and maybe this time he will succeed. Ruin was determined to complete this task at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing his own strength. And with unwavering confidence in his voice, he says he will do it, despite the risks and difficulties that lie ahead. The students standing around couldn't believe their eyes, because the size of the fiery sphere was too large, and could this young man really have that much mana? Professor Heidel stood nearby, watching intently and seemingly doubting what he saw, as if his mind didn't want to accept it. Ruin mentally praises himself, feeling a wave of satisfaction, and mentally says that this is beautiful, like a moment of triumph after long defeats and suffering. He thinks he should continue in the same vein and be able to surprise everyone, but suddenly he realizes that his problem is coming back to haunt him. And the guy starts to mentally beg himself and tries to hold out at least a little longer, but his efforts are in vain. So the fiery sphere in his hands gradually becomes smaller, losing power, and Ruin exhales in frustration, feeling hope slipping from his fingers. His body suddenly succumbs to nausea and dizziness. The world around him blurs and his legs barely hold him, as if under the weight of an invisible and ruthless burden. The professor calls out to him, peering anxiously into the pale face, but Ruin, in a trembling voice, replies that he simply can't hold it in anymore. So the teacher sternly ordered him to immediately release the force from his hand, fearing that in another moment the uncontrolled energy would cause irreparable damage. But Ruin understands with alarm and informs Professor Heidel that the fiery sphere seems to have grown to his hand and is not leaving at all, pulsing more and more strongly. Then the man says that the boy is in his final year, and if he still can't use ordinary magic, such as a fire sphere, then he simply won't pass the final exam. And he says that Ruin is destined to fail, to which the young man only quietly agrees, as if accepting the verdict, and repeats these words, as if imprinting them in his mind. But Ardell sincerely apologizes, looking down, and promises that he will train even harder to prove to everyone and to himself that he is capable of becoming stronger. In this practical shooting test, they have to create 10 fire spheres and hit the target multiple times, but Ruin cannot make even one sphere hit the target. Therefore, he does not even count on the role of a third-rate magician and hears condemnation from his classmates who consider him not worthy of training at all. Because he became the best applicant, a nobleman from the province, teenagers from wealthier families began to envy Ruin and feel incomplete, and because of this, they mocked him, but he would endure it. But the reality that leaves him with no hope begins to destroy him from within, and this curse is the only thing holding him back for all 6 years. The mana release disorder was what kept him from living his life to the fullest, and Ruin only wondered how much longer he could hold out like this. There was a loud commotion in the academy corridor. Conversations and footsteps could be heard, and the walls echoed, creating a feeling of continuous movement and life. The students whispered among themselves about who passed the exam, how, and what their scores were, because everyone was curious, because it was happening for the first time. Upon seeing Ruin, the pupils immediately began to hurl insults at him, their mockery and evil smiles painfully cutting the young man's heart. They asked if it wasn't time for him to pack his things and go home, and if they were in his place, they would be ashamed to show themselves here, but Ruin seemed persistent. Two of the pupils, looking at him, asked if he knew what the younger ones called him, but they immediately replied that the fool was Ruin. They further say that because of the young man, the graduating class is not a role model, and he finally needs to go back to his province. After all, nature did not endow him with skills, so he needs to at least be rich. But here, too, there is a problem, because they only heard the name Ardell when they entered the academy. And this white-faced pupil speaks as if mocking what his father said. They are all just fools, who behave arrogantly, but have nothing, hinting at Ruin's condition. Therefore, he immediately understood the level of Ruin's family, drawing a contemptuous conclusion for himself that the young man's origin was not capable of commanding any respect. But unable to bear the humiliation, the boy abruptly jumps up and swiftly strikes his opponent, putting all his accumulated anger and resentment into him. He, losing his balance from the unexpected blow, staggered back and fell heavily to the floor, the loud thud of which echoed throughout the corridor. Ruin, trembling with anger, leans towards his opponent and in a sharp tone demands that he repeat what he said earlier, pronouncing each word with cold fury. But the opponent, holding his broken nose, curses through the pain and cannot believe how Ruin dared to do such a thing in front of all the witnesses. Ruin looks at him and says that he needs to know when to stop and who is this Ben Folt to talk about his father and family. But Ben's friend, defending him, decides to direct his attack at Ruin, as if he doesn't even know who he's dealing with in this skirmish. Suddenly his eyes widen in shock, as if he had just seen something incredible, and at the same moment an expression of complete astonishment freezes on his face. After all, the young man was the first to deliver an unexpected blow, which caused the enemy to hunch over and not hold back. A sharp, suffocating cough burst from his chest. The opponent suddenly falls to his knees, trying to catch his breath, and his hands convulsively rest on the floor as if seeking support in this humiliating moment. The Ruin of Ardell looms over him, carefully observing his every move and reaction, studying his opponent's behavior with cold caution and a tension that hangs in the air. While his opponent's mouth is dripping with saliva from a strong blow, analyzing every reaction and tension in his body. The young man looks at him angrily and loudly calls him an insolent bastard, feeling both rage and contempt pulsing in his every word and movement. When Ben Folt rises and tries to use his battle magic right inside the academy walls, it gives Ruin a real shock, as he did not expect such desperation. He loudly calls him a piece of trash with a magic release disorder, not thinking at all about the fact that for such actions he could be expelled from school, showing insolence and anger at the same time. So Ben Folt directs all his energy at Ruin, feeling rage and hatred, and sincerely wishes him death, not hiding his desperation and determination in every move. Ruin realizes that he cannot even move to save himself, feeling helplessness gripping his body and danger looming over him with terrifying inexorability. Suddenly, Professor Heidel appears and with a sharp shout orders them to stop immediately, causing both fighters to instantly stop, the tension in the air abruptly dissipating under his stern gaze. As Ben's magic gradually consumes Ruin, he feels the enemy's power seeping into his body, limiting his movements and consciousness, and every moment is filled with terror and helplessness. The guy doesn't know how to act in this critical situation, feeling confusion and fear that paralyze his mind and make him hesitate with every next step. And then Ruin Ardell realized that this was exactly what his end looked like, when fear and helplessness completely engulfed his mind, and the enemy's magical power inexorably consumed him. And again, this mysterious man is in front of him, who says that the guy is the incarnation of Drak, the destroyer of worlds, and the artifact the player has activated. Ruin mentally asks himself what kind of delusion this is, feeling a mixture of surprise and annoyance as his mind tries to comprehend the absurdity of the situation unfolding around him. The young gentleman seems to be floating in midair when the stranger asks what is happening, and he feels a slight sense of surprise and alertness as he tries to assess the new situation. The man looks at Ruin and says his name, Dell, feeling both surprise and curiosity as the new encounter brings unexpected feelings and tension. But then he says Ruin Ardell again, and he instantly realizes that it is his own name, feeling a strange mixture of surprise, guesswork, and indescribable excitement. When he opens his eyes, the boy sees a completely different picture in front of him, which makes his heart beat faster, because reality suddenly takes on a strange, almost unreal form. Helen, a high-class healer, appears before him, watching him carefully and asking if Ruin has regained consciousness yet, her voice filled with concern and easy confidence. The young man's eyes reflect shock from the surprise and sudden change in his surroundings, as he barely has time to realize that everything around him has become completely different. And he immediately asks where he is, to which Helen calmly replies that it is the lounge, explaining his condition and at the same time trying to calm the confused young man. She assures him that he's fine and just doesn't need to get up, but Ruin replies that he's dizzy and just wants to sit down, trying to recover a little and regain his balance. The hero still doesn't understand whether he really lost consciousness, because the vision was too realistic, which makes him doubt his own perception and feel a little surprised. Ruin asks Helen how long he was lying in the room, to which she replies that it was almost a whole day, causing Ruin to raise his eyebrows in surprise and assess how much time he had wasted. And he was lucky that nothing worse happened, so the woman feels that God protected him, giving him a chance to recover and regain strength after a terrible ordeal. When asked by the young man if he is okay, Helen replies that he needs to run a few tests, but he looks fine for someone who was struck by a lightning sphere, causing Ruin to be surprised. There are no wounds or burns, and even the internal organs remain intact, so Helen realizes that she has never encountered anything like this before, feeling surprised and curious at the same time. Ruin realizes that the lightning sphere is a terrible magic capable of burning the body in a matter of seconds, and he cannot understand how he managed to take such a blow, feeling both shock and surprise. But suddenly, Professor Heidel appears on the threshold of the room. His stern gaze instantly attracts Ruin's attention, and there is tension in the air, making everyone present wary. Helen says she needs to go check other tests, and asks the guy not to be silent if something bothers him, showing concern and attention to his condition. Professor Heidel approaches and asks in a calm but stern tone how Ruin is feeling, carefully observing his reaction and condition to gauge the seriousness of the situation. Ruin answers his question in the affirmative, and the professor explains that this is precisely why he came, because the professorial council has gathered to discuss the situation and take the necessary measures. The teacher explains that Ben Folt will be expelled from the institution, as using magic with intent to kill is an extremely brazen violation of the rules and endangers the lives of other students. He adds that unfair treatment and bullying of Ruin were also taken into account, and all of these factors formed the basis for the decision to expel Ben Folt from the educational institution. Ruin admits that he also hit Ben, to which the professor replies that he will also be punished and will do volunteer service for 1 month as a discipline lesson. And the teacher also wanted to ask his student something, approaching him with a serious expression on his face, ready to hear his opinion and assess his reaction to the question. He asks if Ruin has some kind of artifact, that is, a legendary weapon, which surprises the young man, because he did not expect that he could be asked about such a thing. After all, if he really had such an artifact, he would not have been mocked, to which the professor explains that, based on the value and rarity of such an item, the head of the Ardell family would have already used it for his people. Ruin doesn't understand why the professor asked him about this, feeling surprised and slightly concerned, because it seems to him that such a topic shouldn't concern his field. But the man gathers his thoughts together to explain the situation in more detail and make sure that the pet understands the real reason for his question. He says he is certain that before the young man was struck by the sphere of lightning, his body was enveloped in a red light, which makes Ruin wonder and suspicious about the nature of this magic. And he adds that he was seemingly protected by a high-ranking artifact that reflected Ben's magic, saving Ruin from a fatal blow and causing him a mixed feeling of surprise and disbelief. The student could not believe Professor Heidel's words, feeling a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and indescribable admiration that his life had been saved by a mysterious artifact. But suddenly he remembers a strange dream and begins to suspect that this may be connected to the events that have occurred, causing him a mixture of surprise and anxiety. However, he tries not to believe it, saying that he doesn't understand what happened and is sure that he doesn't have any artifacts, trying to ward off strange suspicions and remain calm. So the man asks him to rest, while the pet's thoughts are filled with complete uncertainty and lack of understanding of what happened. So he decides not to ask any more questions and just listens silently. He became curious about what the professor was thinking about now and tried to guess his intentions, watching every movement and facial expression, trying to discern his thoughts. The young gentleman realizes that this is an experience that is difficult to distinguish from a dream, and even the strange voice that echoed in his mind now seems to be part of some mysterious reality. Who spoke of the artifact of Drak, the destroyer of worlds, and mentioned a certain player, forcing Ruin to ponder even more about the meaning of these words and their possible connection. He also feels like there was another word, but he can't remember it, leaving a feeling of incompleteness and slight unease in his mind. But suddenly, from the depths of his memories, Ruin remembers that the stranger spoke about the status window, causing him to be surprised and curious about the meaning of these words and their connection to events. Ruin curses himself and still can't figure out if it really happened or if it was just an echo of a strange dream, mixing doubt with irritation. He sees this window in front of him and, raising his eyebrows in surprise, asks Helen if she sees it too, trying to share his surprise and understand the reality of what is happening. He pointed to this blue thing in front of him, but Helen only looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was talking about, because in her opinion there was nothing ahead. Ruin mentally repeated that this simply could not be, because Helen, as before, could not see anything in front of her, and her gaze only wandered into emptiness. The guy realized that only he could see this status window, so he decided to quickly make up a denial and told Helen that he had just imagined it. So the woman, after reviewing the results, calmly reported that all the tests were normal, and he could return to his usual life in the dorm without any problems. Ruin looked at her and said a few polite words of thanks, although in reality his mind was somewhere far away, occupied with completely different thoughts. After all, that day he managed to survive a lightning bolt strike, meet a man with blazing red eyes, and learn from the window that he is the incarnation of Drak. There was even a possibility that the artifact of a powerful mage named Draka had somehow ended up in the young lord's hands, although that seemed almost unbelievable. But suddenly, without any warning, another mysterious window flashed and appeared in the air right in front of him, as if responding to his thoughts. The window had a task that required physical strength and punches and kicks, but Ruin couldn't see how it could be useful to a mage like him. However, there was no doubt when time was running out, and Ruin realized that he had to immediately try to complete the task, even without understanding its meaning. So he clenched his fist and struck, and the window instantly displayed the result, informing him that this was only the first blow of 100 he was to make. Ruin then struck with his other hand, and the window immediately updated, showing that this was the second strike out of 100 he was to perform in this task. The guy noticed how the number on the window was constantly increasing, so he realized that he had to speed up and reach his goal as quickly as possible, without wasting time. Therefore, Ardell once again punched the air with his fist, hoping for a result, but was surprised to notice that the number on the window remained unchanged, as if his punch had not been counted. Ruin realized that his shot had not been counted, and mentally decided that even the slightest inaccuracy in execution would instantly lead to the system not recording the result. The hero decided to go through the training as correctly as possible, carefully performing all the movements and blows so that each of them would be counted without a single mistake. In the deep dark night, Ruin, having finally completed his task, felt relieved, because all the blows were executed accurately, and the window confirmed his success. Drops of sweat rolled down the young man's face, but true satisfaction was visible in his eyes, because he had successfully completed the task and felt an inner pride in himself. A window appeared before him, clearly stating that it was his reward for successfully passing this difficult and grueling test. However, suddenly the young man felt strange changes in his hands, as if they had acquired new strength and sensitivity, and this made him stop in surprise and look closely. He couldn't understand what kind of feeling had taken over him, but he could feel it circulating through his blood, being much more fundamental and important than ordinary mana. So Ruin Ardell felt that he had become truly strong, and his new powers circulating in his body gave him a feeling of confidence and incredible power. So the boy decided to test his new powers in practice, feeling an impatient desire to use them take hold of him, forcing him to move forward without delay. He sharply struck his limb forward, and a powerful energy aura instantly rose around him, vividly demonstrating the power that now resided in his body. Ruin felt that the power flowing into the magic had become much stronger, and the resistance of the air provided driving energy, so everything around him seemed different and felt in a new way. The young mage's core strength had increased significantly, and now he felt it was time to test the second reward that awaited him after successfully passing the test. The boy looked again at the status window that suddenly appeared before him, and felt curious and tense, preparing to find out what new reward it would show. But he saw what was written there, about a power circle that now replaces mana circles, which surprised and intrigued him at the same time. So Ruin understood that this meant the complete replacement of his mana with physical strength, and the thought of how his magical abilities would now transform into pure power was arousing. All who experience and study mana have a circle around the heart that plays a key role in releasing and amplifying mana, providing control and power to its flows. Ruin had 4 circles of mana, far exceeding the normal amount for people his age, but due to his curse, their power was effectively 0. However, suddenly the boy's eyes widened in surprise as he felt something incredible inside him, making his heart beat faster and filling him with excitement. After all, he realized that his mana circles had actually disappeared, and now the circulatory force was filling his body instead, allowing him to control energy in a completely new way. And now he realized that these were power circles, not mana, which literally stunned Ruin and caused shock, because he had never felt such power within himself before. Because he knew nothing at all about mages without mana circles, and the thought that these new power circles might not be a full-fledged replacement frightened him with unknown consequences for himself. The hero couldn't help but ask himself if this meant he would have to forget about life as a mage, because without real mana circles, his abilities might be useless. However, it was too early to give in to such disturbing thoughts. Ruin first decided to test the new power circles in practice to make sure of their true effectiveness. So Ardell focused and summoned his fiery sphere, determined to test how well the new power circles could support a full-power magical attack. He was surprised to notice that the fiery sphere appeared extremely quickly, and could not understand how this was possible, because previously its formation took much longer. Ruin noticed with admiration that his fire sphere had become much stronger than before, and felt the new power circles giving it incredible power and stability. So after pondering for a long time how to explain such a drastic change in strength, it suddenly dawned on him. He finally understood the reason for the incredible increase in the sphere's power. That all this, the power of his artifact, and that he has been given a unique, once-in-a-lifetime chance to test and develop his new abilities to their fullest. The young man knows that there is a basic principle of work in magic, while liberation takes an average of 10 seconds. However, there was another option: to skip this stage and create a fiery sphere entirely through one's own inner power, testing the limits of one's new abilities. And Ruin was convinced that all this incredible power belonged entirely to the artifact. because without it, he would never have been able to create such a strong and fast fiery sphere. However, he felt confused and did not know what to do next, as new opportunities and powers opened up before him that he had never encountered before. He wondered how to fill his body with energy for a powerful attack, and it occurred to him that perhaps Draca had once suffered from a similar disorder and experienced similar feelings. I was surprised how Draca could even come up with such a method, because combining one's own strength with magical energy required extraordinary skill and understanding of the mechanisms of strength. However, Ruin suddenly noticed in the system window that a new task had appeared, and his heart raced as he realized that new trials and challenges lay ahead. After reading the task carefully, Ruin realized that to complete it, he needed to hit the target using pure physical force, and this forced him to tense up and concentrate. However, the guy hadn't even thought about this method yet, and it seemed to him that thanks to it he could reach a new level and become a real magician with incredible abilities. So the hero decided that he had to try to do it, because it was on his actions that he would be able to unlock a new level of power and possibilities. So Ruin aimed his fireball directly at the scarecrow, preparing to test the effectiveness of his new power and watching as his energy gathered for the attack. And with confidence in his eyes, he said that everything had worked, because the fiery sphere had accurately hit the scarecrow, confirming the correctness of his chosen approach and new methods. A new message suddenly appeared on the window, announcing that the task had been completed successfully, and Ruin's power had grown even more, opening up new opportunities and prospects for him. The boy, not believing what was happening, suddenly jumped into the air, feeling a new power fill his body and allow him to perform incredible actions. But suddenly Ruin lay on the ground, feeling an incredible sense of relief, realizing that he had indeed managed to do it, and the task had been completely accomplished. After all, before, every failure of his had occurred precisely at the stage of détente, and the young man finally felt a real victory, overcoming this critical moment and proving his own strength. He was still amazed by this method, and it was impossible to understand who this Draca was, who came up with such a unique technique that could radically change the approach to magic. The young man blacked out right on the training ground, and when the sun rose over the mountains, he woke up, feeling strange and extraneous sounds nearby, disturbing the silence of the morning. He couldn't understand why it was so loud around him, and listened in amazement to the sounds coming from all directions, trying to determine their source. Around him stood other students, who were glad that Ruin had come to his senses, and with smiles and lively exclamations began to address him in a friendly manner, encouraging him. But the young gentleman, without hiding anything, asked those present if they had really seen a person sleeping on the street, as if it was completely normal and nothing to worry about. Suddenly, a boy declared that they had never seen anything like it, especially a nobleman willing to exchange a dormitory for sleeping on the street, and asked if Ruin had been drinking. However, the young man calmly replied that nothing of the sort had happened, and explained that he was simply tired after training and accidentally fell asleep on the spot, without any intention of doing so. The students, looking at each other, quietly agreed that the hero had changed somehow, as his demeanor and confidence after training betrayed a new level of strength and experience. They even noticed a destroyed scarecrow behind them, which was clear evidence of how strong Ruin's new power had become after the task and training he had completed. They could not understand whether it was really Ruin who destroyed it, or perhaps someone else, because the event looked incredible and almost supernatural to their eyes, and he could not have done it. Finally, Ruin Ardal returned to his dormitory, feeling relieved and internally satisfied after all the trials that had come his way that day. Upon entering, the student encountered Jason Damon, who immediately asked what happened, noticing his changed appearance and sensing that something important had happened. Ignite, a sixth-year student at the academy, asked in surprise if this was really the same boy who had just returned, as his appearance seemed unexpected and unusual. Damon didn't understand what had happened because Ruin usually didn't leave the academy, to which he coldly replied that it didn't matter to him, but only this student treated Ardell without hostility. Jason Damon concluded that Ruin was with a girl, but the young man himself realized that this was just his usual activities, and that's why this thought arose in Damon's head. He continued to persistently ask the young man to tell him where he had been the previous night, and added that he was curious about how he had survived the lightning strike, trying to understand the whole situation. Without listening to anyone, Ruin headed to the bathroom, where he was finally able to relax, relieve tension, and allow himself to rest after all the trials and training. Suddenly, the hero remembered an additional task that still remained to be checked and felt that he could not postpone it until later because his success depended on a thorough check. Ruin noticed that the reward remained the same, but the number of repetitions of blows increased significantly, which forced him to prepare for new challenges and make even greater efforts. And, probably, the number of repetitions of blows would continue to double, so the young man should prepare for the fact that even more difficult and exhausting trials would await him ahead. However, the young man was ready to agree to anything if it really helped him become a magician, because the desire for power and knowledge outweighed any difficulties and trials. A month had passed since then, and Ruin had been performing the same task every day, but the number of repetitions had been steadily increasing, forcing him to train more and more intensely and with more endurance. If he failed to complete a task during the day, all his progress was instantly reset, forcing him to start over and tackle all the repetitions again with all his might. Therefore, the guy did not miss a single workout, feeling that even one loss of a day could ruin his progress, and worked diligently on every repetition of the task without exception. However, there was one plus in this situation, which made training a little easier for him, because he saw that each successful day noticeably strengthened his strength and confidence in his own abilities. The plus was that the requirements for completing the task never rose above 3,000 repetitions. Otherwise, Ruin might simply not be able to withstand it and die during the process. Every day, his leg or arm would rise in a blow, and the student would feel how each movement gradually strengthened his body, trained his endurance, and brought him closer to his goal of becoming a magician. And for the past month, Ardell has been going through these grueling workouts every day, never missing a day, gradually increasing his strength and endurance to incredible levels. And as a result of all this daily training, Ruin even acquired a new body art skill that allowed him to control his movements and strength during strikes even more effectively. Silence and tranquility reigned in the academy. A sense of peace was felt all around, while all the students sat in their classrooms. The students noticed that something was wrong with Ruin, as he constantly fell asleep in class, and this caused concern and surprise among his fellow academy members. Moreover, the guy actually settled on the training ground, where he relentlessly practiced punches and kicks, devoting all his time to developing physical strength and skill. But one of the students noted that Ruin was simply trying to compensate for his disorder through constant training, although he doubted that such an approach would actually work. So, for the past month, the teenager has been completing tasks every day while simultaneously searching for any clues that might shed light on Drax's personality and secrets. However, he could never find any mention of mages with that name in historical records, which made Ruin ponder even more about the mystery of Drax. The same went for the Destroyer of Worlds, the player, and the status window. There was no mention of them either, which made Ruin ponder even deeper about the unknown secrets. And he simply couldn't even guess who this Draka really was, because the lack of any information left him confused and forced him to look for answers. He could not understand who the person was who had given the young man such power, because the secret of her identity remained unrecognized, causing Ruin constant surprise and curiosity. However, suddenly, he heard someone calling him, and the voice made him raise his head sharply, full of surprise and tense anticipation of the one who had addressed him. Jason ran up to Ruin and, panting from running, asked if he had heard the news yet, because it seemed that this question urgently needed an answer and could not stand delay. Most likely, the young man had not heard anything yet, as he was just standing there quietly reading books, absorbed in the pages and not noticing any news or changes around him. Ruin Ardell looked up from his book and asked Jason if something serious had happened, as his peaceful occupation had abruptly disrupted the feeling of an ordinary day. To this, Jason replied that the head of the Ardell family had arrived at the academy, and Ruin felt his heart speed up a bit at the unexpected news and the importance of this event. And the young gentleman instantly realized that his father was indeed here, at the academy, and the thought of meeting him made his heart beat faster and caused a wave of tension. Therefore, the boy abruptly jumped up, his heart pounding with excitement, because the realization of his father's presence at the academy forced him to act instantly and without hesitation. Running towards the man and shouting as if calling him, Ruin felt a mixture of joy and anxiety, his heart pounding, and every step brought him closer to the long-awaited meeting. When the elder turned towards him, he still could not recognize who was standing before him, and the young man, running, filled the space around him with impatient anticipation of the meeting. However, suddenly the man's face changed as he recognized his son, and surprise and joy flashed in his eyes, mixed with excitement from the unexpected meeting. Ruin, sitting opposite, noted that his father had sent him here 6 years ago and asked how he had spent all this time, to which he calmly replied that everything was fine, as usual. The young man asked how his younger sister Ruina was, and his father replied that she had grown up and was now studying the martial art of swordsmanship, having made significant progress. He added that she wanted to protect her weaker older brother, and Ruin felt a little uncomfortable, to which his father remarked that his sister had always been more confident. However, suddenly the boy gathered all his inner strength and, full of determination, turned to his father, seeking to convey his thoughts and feel the support of his family. He calmly said that everything was fine with him, trying to reassure him and show that, despite all the trials and training, he felt strong and ready for further challenges. The father did not believe his son's words, but Ruin persistently repeated that everything was indeed fine, and no one was mocking him either physically or morally, demonstrating his own confidence. The elder Ardell seemed to not know how to properly explain the reason for his visit to the child, and his words got lost, leaving the child waiting for important and unknown information. He finally said that he had actually come to make sure the boy wasn't planning to leave the academy, and these words made Ruin feel anxious and responsible. After all, if he is having a hard time, the doors of his home are always open, and the father reminds him that his son has already overcome many difficulties that he cannot even talk about, demonstrating his strength. Ruin immediately understood why his father arrived 6 years later, but explained that during this time he had found his own way out and learned to cope with difficulties on his own. So he suggested that we make an agreement, because he would have to show excellent results on the next exam, and both understood that this would require concentration and serious preparation. But if he fails the exam, the elder Ardell himself will decide his future fate. So, seeing his son's determination, the head of the family returned to the estate. Here came the long-awaited day of the exam, for which Ruin had been preparing for the entire last month, with tension and hidden excitement in his heart. Which begins with a written test of understanding magic, where every mistake or attempt to break the rules is severely punished, up to and including a complete nullification of the result. So Ruin, grabbing his pen, took a deep breath and began the exam, trying to concentrate so as not to waste a single second. The exam consisted of a written and practical stage. This part was divided into 4 more tests: target shooting, measuring magical power, real combat, and a one-on-one duel. Ruin coped flawlessly with the written part, as he had throughout his studies, but in the practical tests, Mikkel from the influential Garyhill family always remained the undisputed leader. This time, the hero was convinced that everything would be different, because he had trained non-stop and finally felt a strength within himself that could challenge even Mikkel. And he was too confident in himself, because he believed that this thing would be able to win first place, despite all the obstacles on the way. After completing the written part, it's time to move on to the practical exam, where Ruin will have to prove his skills and strength in action. Jason Damon walked up to Ruin and called out to him loudly, showing confidence and intent on watching his every move on the practical exam. He asked if Ruin had any plan of action, because his strange behavior caused surprise and forced Jason to be prepared for any development of events. The hero replied that he would try a new approach today, to which his friend asked in surprise if the young man had really found a way that could challenge him in a practical duel. Their conversation was interrupted by another student, Mikkel, who called the boy over in surprise and asked what he was doing here, as if there was no point in being here. Suddenly, Mikkel Garyhill shouted at Ruin and asked if he really, despite his disorder, dared to participate in a practical duel, showing surprise and disbelief. The younger Ardal replied that he had actually only come to take the exam, and there was nothing wrong with that, demonstrating calmness and confidence in his abilities in front of Mikkel. And then Mikkel decided to give advice to someone who had not passed the practical part for 6 years, full of light sarcasm and a desire to emphasize his own superiority. So, instead of going out and subjecting himself to humiliation, Mikkel suggested that Ruin simply surrender, leaving him surprised and a little irritated. But the young man sharply replied that he would not need Mikkel's advice, demonstrating determination and unwavering confidence in his own abilities and intentions. However, suddenly Mikkel noticed that Ruin had misunderstood him, explaining that with the disorder, he was unlikely to be able to successfully pass this exam, leaving his opponent in his thoughts. The hero did not understand where Mikkel got such courage and confidence from, because he had never behaved so boldly and self-confidently before. The first part of the practical exam was aimed shooting at designated targets, where each miss could cost valuable points and affect the overall result. His goal was simple: to determine how many targets a future magician could hit at once, assessing accuracy, speed, and control of magical power while firing. But this year, the level of difficulty was significantly increased, as the targets were now moving, forcing participants to demonstrate not only accuracy, but also reaction speed and skill in controlling magic. Student Angela missed a single target, and this immediately affected her grade, highlighting the difficulty of the new moving targets and the high demands of the exam. Other participants also struggled with the exam, and therefore the overall scores were simply terrible, demonstrating the incredible difficulty of the task. Because the next student was only able to hit 3 targets, confirming how difficult the exam was and how high the demands were on future magicians. And who would have thought that, because of such a seemingly insignificant difficulty, the performance would drop so much, and the quality of graduates would leave much to be desired. Professor Ellick, being Mikkel's uncle, noted that it was too early to be disappointed, because all the tests were still ahead and the main student could show potential. After all, it was Mikkel's time to demonstrate his abilities, and everyone was eagerly waiting to see how he would handle the moving targets and confirm his reputation as the best student. So Professor Ellick's nephew, focused and determined, steps out into the square where spectators, judges, and an uneasy silence await him before the test. As the test begins, Mikkel addresses the young man, urging him to watch carefully and not miss a single move, because every moment could be decisive. After all, he doesn't even realize what Ruin has planned, and how cunning the plan has already begun to imperceptibly materialize right before the eyes of everyone present. The professor, raising his voice impatiently, loudly shouts for Mikkel to begin, eager to begin the test as soon as possible and see what he is truly capable of. And he, agreeing, confidently said that he would show Ruin the difference between them, to prove once and for all which of them possessed true skill and strength. So the student, concentrating all his strength and skill in one powerful movement, hit several targets at once, making the audience gasp in amazement. The students watching this were not at all shocked, because every year Mikkel proved beyond doubt that he was the best among all who had passed such tests. Professor Ellick was sincerely happy, and barely holding back his emotions, said, "Isn't this young man a worthy descendant of the illustrious Garrikill family, whose achievements are remembered by generations?" He turns to Tyrion Ignite and, with a faint smile, asks if he doesn't think that Mikkel is the true pride of their academy and an example for everyone. The head of the academy sternly tells him not to continue, emphasizing that it is enough to demonstrate his abilities and it is time to give the other participants a chance. After all, according to him, this time is quite enough to fairly assess the abilities of current graduates and understand who really deserves recognition and praise. Professor Heidel remarks that, why don't they sit a little longer because Ruin is next to speak, and Tyrion Ignite finds it hard to believe that he is capable of demonstrating any results. But despite his doubts, he agreed to give Ruin his due and to carefully watch how he would handle the exam and whether he could at least partially exceed expectations. Ruin realizes that things are going well and sees this as the perfect opportunity to test his own strength and show everyone what he is capable of to the fullest. So the teacher, observing intently, asks him to begin, signaling that it is time to show his mastery and confirm the skills he has acquired. To this the student agrees, intently preparing his fiery sphere, feeling the energy building up inside, ready to explode with a powerful, devastating blow. Suddenly, the force around him rapidly increases, forming a powerful flame that completely engulfs Ruin, causing everyone present to freeze in admiration and alarm. All the professors and the head of the academy could not believe their eyes, watching the incredible speed of the call, which exceeded all their expectations and imagination. The students, watching Ruin, were also in complete shock, because no one expected him to demonstrate such strength and skill at the very beginning of his performance. Mikkel, despite everything, calmly notes that he has a disorder and emphasizes that the main thing is to hit the target accurately, because only the result matters. And Ruin, in fact, turns out to be almost powerless, because his attempts to resist Mikkel's efforts, in his opinion, have no effect, leaving him vulnerable. The new skill instantly adds acceleration to Ruin's movements, making his every step and maneuver faster and more unpredictable, perhaps even powerful enough to surpass Mikkel. He recently acquired this skill, and it is thanks to it that the guy is able to move abnormally fast, literally outpacing the expectations of everyone around him and gaining an advantage in a duel. In other words, Ruin Ardell is now moving like a real typhoon, carrying with it improbable speed and force, breaking any obstacles in its path. His face shows absolute self-confidence, which seems to radiate self-confidence and a willingness to overcome any opponent without hesitation. After all, he sincerely believes in his own strength, which has grown incredibly high, giving him a feeling of invincibility and confidence in every movement. Looking at Ruin, sweat dripped from the professors' faces because even they could not hide their surprise and excitement at the incredible strength and speed that the young man was demonstrating. And the students couldn't help but cover their mouths and turn away, watching in fascination as Ruin passed the exam, as his skill and speed left them in awe. Finishing and carefully looking at the result of his work, Ruin realizes that everything turned out exactly as he planned and feels deep satisfaction from the success achieved. Watching the young magician successfully pass his difficult exam, the teachers and mentors present begin to carefully count his scores. So, Ruin had 27 goals, each of which he carefully considered, planning his actions and choosing the most optimal path to achieve them. The students realized that this was the greatest result in the history of the academy, and their faces reflected admiration and surprise at the incredible achievement. Even Tryon Ignis himself rose from his seat and, not hiding his admiration, began to sincerely clap his hands, supporting the students' incredible achievement. He turned to Ruin, looking at him with sincere admiration, and said that this was a stunning result that exceeded all the academy's expectations. All the students also started shouting at Ruin, encouraging and praising him, loudly exclaiming that he was truly a good boy and deserved recognition. But only Mikkel remained confused and could not understand how it happened that the enemy achieved such an incredible result, remaining deeply impressed. Ruin realizes that he is now receiving general recognition and praise that he has never received in all 6 years of study, and he feels strangely moved by this. And this warmth spreads in his chest, filling his heart with joy, because he has long dreamed of feeling such sincere support and recognition from those around him. Professor Ellick could not accept this, and with obvious surprise, said that for the first time in his life, he had seen such a reception that exceeded all his expectations. But Professor Heidel, standing up for his student, indignantly asked whether the nature of magic really did not open up limitless possibilities, expressing surprise and support. And if everything happens strictly according to expectations, he added, then it's no longer magic, but simple mathematics, because true magic always contains an element of surprise. But Professor Ellick, disagreeing, continued to argue, defending his point of view and trying to prove that the situation could not violate the usual rules of magic. The head of the academy interrupted him, sternly and at the same time enthusiastically saying that today he had witnessed a real magical miracle created by the student himself. However, he immediately noticed that the other professors had a completely different opinion, and their faces reflected doubt and restrained surprise that could not be ignored. Professor Ellick, listening to the main character, mentally reflected that everything had gone awry because of Ruin's actions, and his heart was filled with anxiety and irritation. Jason Damon felt an incredible joy for his comrade, his heart filled with pride and sincere admiration that Ruin's achievements had surpassed all expectations. And the other students seemed to have changed their attitude towards the young man and began to ask with curiosity how he managed to achieve such incredible success. The boy realizes that until yesterday he was an outcast, laughed at and mocked by everyone, and now he feels deep surprise and mixed emotions at the sudden attention. Everything changed in one day, and the boy understood that for some, Ruin remained like a bone in the throat, causing envy and hidden rejection among his classmates. Entering his room, he unexpectedly sees Mikkel sitting there waiting, and this makes the meeting tense and a little uncomfortable. But Ruin, noticing him in his space, discreetly asks what he is doing in someone else's room, trying to hide his surprise and slight indignation. Mikkel explains that he came to warn Ruin not to show off, but the young man himself thinks that the reason for all this is that Mikkel simply lost and is jealous. Grabbing the young magician by the collar of his shirt, his opponent shouts sharply in his face, his voice trembling with anger, and his face turning red with emotion and irritation. But Ruin removes his hand from his shoulder with surprising ease, showing no aggression, just calmly pushing Mikkel away and remaining steadfast. This calm gesture only further irritated his opponent, provoking genuine anger in Heracles and a desire to prove his superiority at all costs. After all, Mikkel could not understand where Ruin got so much strength from, and this only increased his surprise and irritation, making the situation even more tense. Ardell calmly states that it is important for both of them to complete their training, and if he wants to defeat him, let him do it honestly in a one-on-one battle, without outside interference. After his proposal, Ruin calmly releases his hand, remaining calm and demonstrating confidence that now everything will be decided in a fair battle. Mikkel challenges him by asking if Ruin really considers himself worthy of fighting him, since throughout his 6 years of study, he has consistently failed exams and appeared weak. The young man calmly replied that he just had to wait, and then all doubts would disappear, and the truth would become clear, showing who was truly worthy of the battle. Mikkel warns that Ardell should not even think about taking the next exams before their battle, emphasizing the seriousness and audacity of his intention. But the student mentally believes that in today's exam, the young man will not be able to overcome even the first stage, confident in his weakness and doubting his chances. Pulling his hand out of his pocket, he does so slowly and confidently, demonstrating calm and readiness for any upcoming development. Looking at her, he thinks that whatever the circumstances, Ruin is truly a magician, and this certainty causes him surprise, admiration, and respect at the same time. The second stage of the practical exam consisted of measuring the students' magical power, testing their abilities and level of control over magic under the close supervision of their teachers. The treasure of the academy, the ancient ogre Kingram, was transformed by the Archmage Freud 500 years ago during his lifetime, so the students need to direct magic at him and show a high result. Ruin asks Damon if he really needs to cast the spell he is sure of on the statue and receives an affirmative answer, which only strengthens his resolve. But this ogre is famous for his cruelty in evaluation, and getting more than 20 points is already considered an excellent result, which makes the task especially difficult. One of the students summons a powerful thunderstorm and directs his spell at the ogre, causing the air around the statue to crackle with energy and tension. But Kingram, in a menacing voice, orders him to hide from his sight and, with a contemptuous smile, calls him a one-point magician, humiliating him in front of everyone. He mockingly suggests that his pupil give up magic right now, stating that with such skills, he will never become a real wizard. The next student confidently walks into her exam, preparing to show off everything she has learned, and with hope in her eyes, she directs her steps towards the ogre statue. She turns to her companion and, with a faint smile, tells him to watch carefully, because now she will show the true power of her magic. She concentrates, raises her hands, and casts an ice sphere spell, filling the air with cold that swirls around her before releasing it at her target. Kingram respectfully says that he will definitely remember it, because what he saw was truly impressive and worthy of recognition, even by his strict standards. But then the ogre coldly lowers her to the ground and adds with a sneer that he was only truly struck by her hopelessness, causing the crowd to freeze in embarrassment. He gives her only 2 points, and the girl cannot hold back her tears because it was her best attack, into which she had invested all her strength and hopes, hoping for a higher score. Jason also failed the exam and only got a 5, but not wanting to accept it, he argued until he was ordered to return to his seat. Mikkel Garahill is called up next, and all the students watch with interest as he confidently takes the exam, preparing to show off his abilities. The student gathers all his strength together, filling himself with determination, and looks as confident as possible, ready to demonstrate his true strength in front of everyone. He focuses his magical power on the statue, feeling the energy pulsing in his hands, ready to strike the target with maximum accuracy. And suddenly the ogre Kingram, loudly and sternly, declares that he is disappointed, and suspiciously asks if Mikkel is not the son of George Garahill, causing surprise among all present. To this, Mikkel calmly replies that he is indeed his proud third son, looking confident and seemingly enjoying revealing his family connection. Kingram laughs loudly at the young man and disdains that his father was a worthless person who begged for points, emphasizing his contempt for Mikkel's family. But even the student doesn't have much talent, so Kingram gives him only 27 points, and the boy sharply disagrees with the assessment, feeling indignant. He is asked to calm down, and after that, Ruin Ardal is called next, who prepares to show his abilities, watching the reaction of those around him. The young man realizes that he is a little nervous before the exam begins, feeling a little anxious, but he tries to pull himself together and set himself up for success. But he sincerely believes that he can handle this challenge, and this gives him determination and confidence, allowing him to focus on the task despite his anxiety. He approaches the statue, says that it is nice to meet him, introduces himself as Ruin Ardal, demonstrating calm and confidence before the start of the exam. To this, Kingram replies with curiosity and slight surprise that this is the first time he has seen this student, carefully observing his behavior and magical abilities. However, he dismissed it with disdain and said it didn't matter, sternly ordering the exam to begin, forcing the students to focus on the task. Ruin casts his spell, and suddenly the professor notices that he is using explosive burning mana that radiates incredible energy and threatens the entire statue. The students realize that this is 4th grade magic and are shocked, as no one expected to see anything like this, even among the most talented students. Kingram himself cannot understand where the young man gets such steadfastness from, and his astonishment only grows, for he has never before encountered such unwavering confidence and control of magic. But the young man does not hesitate and begins to advance, confidently moving forward, demonstrating skill and control over magic, which makes everyone around him hold his breath. He focuses his attack on the statue, channeling all of his accumulated energy and magic into a powerful explosion that should hit the target as effectively as possible. He stands before him, looking composed and calm, as if he knows that his strength and mastery of magic allow him to overcome any difficulty. The professor is surprised and says that this is impossible, because the young man transferred the magic from his fist to his leg and exploded it in just 1 second, demonstrating incredible skill. The students realize that they are facing a 5th-grade spell, and their surprise grows because no one expected to see such power on a practical exam. But Ruin paid no attention to anyone, completely focused on his work, his gaze and movements indicating maximum concentration and self-control. And he was relieved to realize that his spell had worked as it should, radiating the control and precision he had long sought to achieve. But Kingram's reaction seems strange, and the student begins to doubt whether everything really went as it should, or whether something might have gone wrong during the spell. Suddenly, the ogre sharply asks Ruin who he is, his voice full of surprise and undisguised interest, because no one has demonstrated such strength before. He adds whether he is Draco, which instantly confuses the young gentleman, forcing him to hold his breath and ponder the meaning of these words. After his words, Kingram says that he was exactly what he expected, emphasizing that everything that happened was predictable and he was looking forward to meeting Drac. He watches Ruin carefully, intently studying his every movement and gesture, while simultaneously pronouncing the name he has decided to call him, as if trying to figure something out. The students cannot figure out who Kingram is talking about and wonder if he really just confused people, because his words sound too definite and mysterious. Ruin realizes that in 2 months he has read every book he could find, but none of them mentioned a word about Drac, leaving him deeply surprised. So he turns to the statue and asks if it knows him, and is surprised to receive a clear, positive answer, which only increases his surprise and curiosity. He looks ahead and speaks to the ogre, asking him to tell him more about Drac, hoping to gain some clarity in the mysterious and confusing situation. To this, the ogre replies that all of this is extremely interesting, as if he is interested in the very essence of it and the situation unfolding around Ruin, causing a slight admiration. And who would have thought that Kingram would notice his incarnation right at the academy, causing Ruin to feel both surprise and a slight excitement from the surprise. He asks the young man to repeat his name again, and the young man, a little surprised, answers clearly and confidently, Ruin Ardell, which forces the listeners to listen more carefully. So the statue says that it will remember him, as if imprinting Ruin's name in his memory, leaving the young man with a sense of the importance of the moment and its mysterious significance. He says he will answer his question later because there are many people around and the ogre is expected to score points, leaving Ruin slightly surprised and impatient. Kingram announces that the evaluation is complete, as the student's magic does not match that which allows for an accurate determination of the result, leaving everyone present in mild surprise. But the professor reminds us that according to the rules, an estimate must be made in any case, and this contract must be fulfilled within 5,000 years. Kingram was furious and couldn't understand how the man dared to address him like that, considering he was judging children who didn't even look like real wizards. But knowing that a contract is a contract, the ogre is forced to agree and give an assessment, albeit with obvious dissatisfaction and internal resistance. Kingram asks Ruin how much he wants to get, 0 or 100 points, watching his reaction carefully, as if testing his courage and determination. And Ruin Ardell, without hesitation, chooses 100 points as his rating, demonstrating a determination and confidence that even Kingram is forced to admit with some surprise. All the students were in complete shock at this result, not hiding their surprise and searching for an explanation as to how the student could get 100 points. And the boy once again found himself at the very epicenter of events, attracting the attention of everyone around him and feeling how every movement and word acquired extraordinary importance. Professor Heidel reports that the head of the academy has already learned of his result and that the young man deserves the award, causing Ruin to feel a sense of pride and unexpected excitement. He hands the young man a roll of paper, and the young man, slightly surprised and at the same time interested, carefully takes it in his hands, feeling the weight of the moment. The guy reads about the artifact room and cannot figure out what it is, feeling both surprise and curiosity about the mysterious place. So Professor Heidel orders him to follow, and the young gentleman, a little excited and full of anticipation, carefully follows his mentor, trying not to fall behind. He agrees to what lies ahead, a little hesitantly, but with a sense of curiosity and determination, ready to follow it and learn everything. He admits that he did not know about the existence of such a place, and the man explains that it is the only place where entry is strictly prohibited, emphasizing its uniqueness and mystery. So Ruin doesn't understand why he's being taken there since the place is forbidden, and feels a mixed sense of surprise and slight excitement before the unknown. They stand at the entrance, and the professor warns that they can only advance to this point, emphasizing the severity of the restrictions and the importance of the rules. So Ruin realizes that he will have to enter alone, feeling both excitement and fear of what awaits inside the forbidden room. Not understanding what exactly is happening, the boy decides that he needs to see for himself, feeling a mixture of excitement and intense curiosity. He cautiously enters the artifact room, feeling his heart beat faster with surprise and anticipation of what might unfold before his eyes. Inside, he sees many objects he has heard of before, and quickly concludes that this is most likely the magical warehouse of the Archmage Freud Ignis, full of secrets and power. Suddenly the boy hears a voice softly saying that the student looks confused, forcing Ruin to concentrate even more and try to understand what is happening. But it turns out that it was Kingram who unexpectedly appeared before him, causing the pet to feel both surprise and slight excitement. And he no longer looks like a stone statue but appears before Ruin alive and real, his presence adding unexpected weight and tension to the situation. So the ogre explains that this is the only place where he can appear in his true form, and Ruin realizes the uniqueness of the moment and the rarity of such an opportunity. But the student asks what the ogre meant when he spoke of its value, feeling both curious and slightly agitated by the mystery of what was said. To this, Kingram replies that the young man does not yet realize his true significance, forcing him to reflect on the depth of what was said and his own potential. Despite the fact that Ruin uses the same artifact as the player, he still does not fully realize its significance and the power hidden within. After all, this artifact is one of a kind, so Ruin wonders in surprise how he managed to obtain it, feeling both curiosity and slight surprise. But the young man sincerely replies that he himself does not know how he ended up with this, and does not understand who Draco is at all, leaving Kingram in slight surprise. He is not sure whether to trust the guy's words, carefully observing his behavior and trying to figure out how sincere his answer is. However, Kingram suddenly explains that this is an entity that aspired to become God, causing Ruin to feel both astonishment and slight fear of its power. Draco once came to the Sky Peak tribe, to which an ogre belonged. He was short and small, and his appearance looked unattractive. His strength was so insane that no one in the entire tribe could stand up to him, and what's more, Draco only grew in power with each passing day. He was respected not only because he lived with them under the same sky and shared their traditions, but also because he had long since become an integral part of their tribe. He tirelessly taught Kingram, the chosen successor to the future leader of the tribe, the secrets of the language and the refined art of magic for a long 100 years, passing on to him the knowledge and wisdom of generations. Ruin could not comprehend with his mind how an ordinary person could live for so many long centuries, because for him, even one life seemed too short. To this, the ogre calmly explained that the one they considered human had never actually been mortal, for his nature and origin belonged to a completely different world. His true form was the majestic black dragon Dracogonia, whose dark scales shone with a cold brilliance, and whose very name inspired ancient terror and unwavering respect in the hearts of men and tribes. The main character was so shocked by the information he heard that for a long time he couldn't come to his senses and believe whether everything he said was really true, because to him it sounded like an incredible legend. Kingram only replied in surprise. Did the young man really not know that magic itself originated from dragons? But for the main character, this was always just a beautiful fiction. But the ogre said with certainty that Draco, despite his origins and unprecedented power, was completely incapable of using magic. So he invented his own way of fighting, like Ruin now, filling his arms and legs with magic so that every blow and movement became deadly accurate and incredibly powerful. Ruin was convinced that Draco was being treated the same way as he was, and finally, realizing this, he understood the full depth of events and the reasons for actions that had previously seemed incomprehensible. The Black Dragon had invented a unique ability that only he could use, and now he demonstrated it to Ruin for the first time, showing all his unprecedented power and skill. And thanks to this incredible ability, Draco became the strongest being in the world, whose power exceeded all limits, and even the most powerful creatures did not dare to challenge him. But Draco felt no joy in his power and relentlessly increased it until he eventually brought himself and everyone around him to their doom, leaving only destruction in his wake. And Ruin finally realized why he was called the Destroyer of Worlds, because the power that Draco once possessed was so incredible that the young man could not even imagine its true scale. Suddenly the hero noticed a window in front of him, and a sense of reward flared up in his heart, for he realized that he now had the opportunity to communicate with the ogres. In addition, there was a unique skill that allowed him to significantly increase his own strength by taking it from an ogre, and the hero, realizing this, felt new horizons of possibilities. Suddenly, a ball appeared in Ruin's hands, embodying the incredible power he had gained, radiating power and light that was both captivating and terrifying. Kingram explained that this was probably a reward for a task completed, because Draco always had a habit of talking about such things into the void, as if leaving them for someone else. Ruin cautiously asked if the ogre knew what was in his hands right now, for the power and mystery of the orb were so great that the young man did not dare to draw conclusions. And Kingram carefully examined the object, untwisted it in his hands, examining every detail, and then calmly said that it was Stran, and its true power could change everything. He said that this was not just an object, but the very embodiment of a force that lived a life of its own, radiating incredible energy and potential. But Ruin still could not understand what was being said, for the meaning of Kingram's words and the true nature of that embodiment of power remained extremely mysterious to him. The ogre explained that this power had always been with Draco, and given his current state, he had most likely sealed it within the Spirit Stone at the time of his death. Strawn, having a vile character, demanded infinite power from Drac, and although his wishes were cunning, fulfilling them could open up the promise of limitless power to the young man. Ruin wondered if an incarnation would truly be born from this stone, for though he felt its powerful energy, it was difficult for him to imagine how such a force could come to life. Kingram said that the incarnation would hatch very soon, and at that moment the air filled with a crackling and fluttering, as if reality itself were reacting to the awakening. So, a small bear appeared before Ruin, which, despite its modest size, radiated a strange power, as if hiding a huge secret inside. And this strange appearance of this animal caused the young man deep confusion, because he could not understand why the embodiment of incredible power looked like this. But suddenly, Strawn abruptly said that Ruin was a scoundrel because he had dared to call him a bear, and his words came out with such force that the young man felt surprised. The young man still could not understand how such an ordinary-looking animal could suddenly speak in a human voice, and his mind was filled with surprise, doubt, and a slight fear. Suddenly, the little bear, who had turned out to be extremely angry and domineering, sternly ordered Ruin Ardell never to call him that again. Ruin, surprised and slightly confused, asks again how it is possible that this unusual creature can speak and tries to understand the meaning of what is happening. Strawn sternly and angrily replies that he does not understand how the young man dared to call him an animal, because he is not one at all, and this offends his dignity and pride. Then he explains that he is an embodiment that is not bound to any form and therefore can be anyone, choosing his appearance and nature at will. He then sternly orders Ruin to carefully observe his strength, demonstrating that his power goes far beyond the ordinary and emphasizing his own essence. The boy's eyes reflected shock and complete confusion, because what he saw surpassed all his ideas about the possible and made him doubt his own eyes. When the little bear tensed up sharply, it seemed as if his body was about to burst from the incredible power he suddenly wanted to radiate. But suddenly he shouted in despair that he didn't know where his strength had gone, and this unexpected voice completely confused the hero, adding chaos to an already incredible scene. And the problem is probably that he was born with an empty stomach, so the bear, feeling weak, asks Ruin for some food, hoping to regain his strength. The young man admits that he doesn't even know what kind of food to give, to which Strawn angrily responds, asking why his current master is so weak. Turning abruptly, Strawn went to sleep, asking to be awakened only when food appeared, leaving Ruin deeply confused and stunned by his words about his master. Kingram notes that even though millennia have passed, his character has remained unchanged, the same stubbornness and pride that have not changed even with the passage of time. Looking at Ruin with Strawn, the ogre seems to be returning to the good old days, when life was simple and events were filled with nostalgia and memories of the past. After all, they remind him of Strana and Drak, whom he once met in his homeland in the Sky Peak tribe, awakening the fire of old memories and nostalgia. He asks what Ruin Ardell, a young destroyer who carries the will of Drak, is going to do next, seeking to understand his intentions and future path. With this force that makes him extremely powerful, standing on the edge, it can either destroy him or guide him on the right path, shaping his destiny and choices. Ruin realizes that the true reason for his quest for power was to protect his people from demons, realizing that his goal was always noble. He also understands that he sought to glorify the Ardell name and show himself to those who had previously insulted him, proving his own dignity and strength through courage and actions. He realizes that this is enough, because he still has a lot to protect, and the young man firmly decides not to give up on his goal, despite all the difficulties. So he answers that he will live according to his own will, standing up for himself, protecting his people and family, and will not allow anyone or anything to guide his path. Kingram says that's good, and will look forward to the future the young mage will bring, hoping that his actions and decisions will define a brighter path for all. After learning the information, his daily routine remained unchanged, except for Strana, who stubbornly refused to wake up, creating a little chaos in the usual order. But as soon as he heard the word food, Strawn suddenly jumped up, forgetting about his tiredness and sleep, and his energy instantly returned, causing everyone around him to look at him in surprise. And Ruin realizes that feeding has now been added to everything else, becoming a new daily obligation capable of bringing chaos to his routine. After all, this little bear seemed to live only on food, and each meal was a source of intelligence and strength for him, which made his behavior completely dependent on nutrition. But more than that, he consumes too much, so that even large food supplies quickly disappear, forcing Ruin to constantly monitor his appetite and replenish supplies. Ruin realized that this food in question was actually a kind of power that the young man gained from completing his tasks, and that consuming it directly affected his power. After studying the status windows, Ruin realizes that Strawn is useful to him because the companion skill accelerates the guy's development, providing additional support and improving his abilities. Its owner gains 100 strength points each time it becomes stronger, and 200 when it gains 2 stars, and this process repeats itself endlessly. Before his ceiling, he had 31 stars, to which Ruin replies that he feels strong even without 1,000 units of strength, realizing the inner power that experience gives him. The hero asks how Draca reached such a level, and if there are ways to increase his strength without completing the task, trying to find an alternative path of development. Strawn replies that if he really wants to learn how to reach that level, then he should first give him a glass of water, emphasizing his demandingness even in small things. Ruin asks if he can remain silent if he wants to die of hunger, but the little bear firmly replies that he will speak up anyway, without hiding his needs. One way to become stronger is to perform tasks of increased difficulty that test the limits of abilities and contribute to significant development of strength and skills. Similarly, strength increases when creating items or finding artifacts, as each such action adds experience. You can also boil ogre tendons and prepare an elixir, because such rituals or chemical experiments provide additional strength and strengthen the abilities of the one who performs them. However, all of these options prove unsuitable for Ruin, as his path and method of gaining power are different from conventional methods. After all, first you need to accumulate 1,000 units of strength, because the host's body is not yet ready to withstand greater power, and without this, any attempts to increase strength can be dangerous. The guy thought he had already become stronger, but in fact his true path had only just begun, and now the next goal is to accumulate 1,000 units of strength. So Ruin trained every day, diligently improving his skills, and gradually his strength reached 930 units, bringing him closer to his intended goal. It was then that the third stage of the exam began, a real battle, where every move and decision mattered, and the young man's true strength was severely tested in conditions of real danger. Strawn sees that today is the day for the host to face the battle he has been waiting for so long, and feels the tension and responsibility that hangs over the upcoming duel. The potential for chaos is high, as the spell can even affect your own, and this test primarily tests how well magicians are able to control risks and act with precision under pressure. Jason, using a fire sphere, suddenly targeted the students nearby, and this instantly created a dangerous situation, forcing everyone to closely monitor his actions. Therefore, due to such a mistake, Jason Damon is eliminated from the test, as his carelessness could have caused serious harm, demonstrating how dangerous a fight without control over magic is. The Knights of Foldren were invited to assist in conducting the exam to ensure the safety of all participants and prevent possible emergencies. The exam lasted 10 days, and based on the students' results, they were awarded various monsters. At the end of the exam, 13 students received high scores for their achievements. Since today is the last day of the exam, everyone was extremely curious to see what monster would appear before them, because this would be the final test of their skills and strength. Suddenly, everyone around hears a strange noise that echoes throughout the area, causing surprise and alarm among participants and observers. A huge orc suddenly appeared before them, his presence instantly causing fear and tension among the students, forcing them to prepare for a dangerous duel. They are much larger than humans and have high intellectual abilities, which is why wars are constantly taking place between them and humans. The students ponder whether it is right to fight him as part of the exam, and worry about what will happen if someone dies at his hands, realizing the danger and seriousness of the test. The professor orders the young magicians to remain calm and focus on doing their best, emphasizing that only self-control and maximum effort will allow them to cope. The orc, without wasting a moment, swiftly attacked the students. His movements were quick and ruthless, forcing the magicians to react instantly and use all their skills. Covered by shields, they try to come together, organize defense, and prepare a joint strategy to counter the powerful orc. Mikkel, standing behind, prepares his attack, carefully assessing the situation and choosing the most opportune moment to deliver an effective blow to the orc. Using an ice arrow, Mikkel concentrates magical energy to direct it precisely at the orc, hoping to slow or seriously damage the enemy. However, this does not bring success. The attack flies to the wrong place, missing and forcing Mikkel to quickly adjust his tactics to prevent danger. Because Mikkel sees his opponent from above, he realizes that the trajectory of the ice arrow is wrong and he has to urgently reorient himself. Professor Heidel immediately orders the student to quickly dodge to avoid the danger of the orc's attack and maintain control of the situation during the fight. However, Mikkel realizes that his body is frozen in place with fear, and he cannot carry out the order, feeling panic paralyzing his every movement. Professor Heidel then casts his wooden prison spell, quickly creating a barrier of solid wood to contain the orc and protect the students from direct threat. The spell envelops the orc, and he is instantly frozen in place, unable to move, giving the students a chance to regroup and prepare for further action. His eyes seem to burn with anger and an undisguised intent to kill his pet, reflecting the wild rage that boils within him, despite the fact that he is frozen in a wooden trap. Trying to grab Mikkel, he shouts incomprehensible sounds that sound like a roar of rage and anger, emphasizing his aggression and dangerous mood even at such a moment. But suddenly the student hears his name and the message that he is failing the exam, which instantly shocks him and causes a feeling of confusion and anxiety. His fist clenches in anger, because such a decision was completely unexpected for him, causing a storm of emotions and a sense of injustice. Professor Ellick, who was Mikkel's uncle, is deeply unhappy because his nephew has failed again, and this causes him a mixture of disappointment and anxiety for his future. Realizing that he needs to somehow prevent Ruin from passing the test, he turns to Tryon Ignis and asks if he plans to continue the exam in the same spirit. But the man doesn't understand what exactly the professor wants from him, because Ruin is next in line, and his attention is focused on the upcoming test. Ellick agrees and adds that Ruin is the only student to receive the highest grade from Kingram, highlighting his exceptional abilities and potential among the other students. He adds that it would be unfair to evaluate Ruin on a par with other students, because his achievements far exceed the standards of a regular test. Tryon Ignite understands what is going on, but points out that they do not have any other monsters prepared, so it is currently impossible to change the conditions of the exam or choose an alternative. However, Professor Ellick notes that they still have something that can be used, hinting at the availability of certain resources or ways to influence the course of the exam. When the Knights of Faldrin brought the orcs, the atmosphere instantly became tense, and all the participants in the exam realized that an extremely difficult and dangerous test awaited them. Together they also brought an ogre, a huge and formidable creature whose presence greatly increased the level of danger for the students during the exam. It is extremely dangerous to use, but with Professor Heidel and the knights present, you can even observe the ogre without risking your own life. So they will have the opportunity to see what Ruin Ardell is capable of, to evaluate his skills and strength in real combat under the supervision of experienced mentors. Professor Heidel stood in the academy corridor, impatiently waiting for Ruin, preparing to direct him to another test and monitor his actions. The student, approaching, did not understand what had happened, feeling confused and surprised by the unexpected events unfolding around him. Before the test began, Professor Heidel intended to explain that today's exam would be much more difficult and dangerous for Ruin Ardell than for the rest of the students. The professor explains that the academy has high hopes for Ruin, as Kingram gave him an extremely high score, which is why some consider it unfair to give the young man such a monster. Ruin, with slight confusion, wondered what context the professor meant in his long story, because it seemed to him that Heidel's words concealed something more. Professor Heidel replies that the young magician must face a real ogre to prove his strength, endurance, and willingness to live up to the Academy's expectations. Strawn replies with a sly smile that the fight will be extremely fun to watch, because he will find himself in a situation that will reveal his true capabilities. His opponent stood before him, bound by heavy steel handcuffs that rattled with every movement, reminding him of his power and at the same time his limitations. He looked extremely aggressive, as if with his whole being he only wanted the death of his opponent, and in his eyes burned an uncontrollable desire for battle. The other students at first did not realize that Ruin was not an orc, as they thought, but a real ogre, and this difference immediately made the situation much more dangerous. Jason exclaimed in confusion that this simply could not be, because he had not expected to see a real ogre, and this made his face look extremely confused. The invited knight explained that he had been specifically asked to bring this monster for testing, and he stood firm, ready to carry out the Academy's orders. However, he noted that he does not consider it right to use an ogre to test students' skills, as such a dangerous practice can lead to unpredictable consequences. Outwardly, ogres resemble orcs, but they are physically much stronger, and one of their blows can shatter a skull, making them extremely dangerous opponents for anyone. The man wondered if they were sure of their plan, because even experienced knights found it extremely difficult to capture this monster. The professor replied that this was a strict order from the head of the academy, and the knight thought that they seemed to have a passion for putting their own lives on the line for orders. Ruin, coming closer, coldly said that his life would now hang in the balance because he understood all the danger that lay ahead. The man slowly turned to Ruin, looking at him carefully, as if trying to gauge his determination and willingness to meet danger face to face. Our hero firmly stated who he was and why he was taking part in this difficult test, emphasizing his own determination and willingness to face danger. The knight could not believe that this young man was pitted against an ogre, and doubted that he could defeat such a powerful creature, for the difference in strength was extremely great. But in any case, he knew that together with Professor Heidel, they would stand by him and protect the young man from any danger, no matter how terrible it might be. Suddenly, Ruin moved forward, and the man immediately called him back, trying to hold the young man back and draw his attention to the danger that loomed nearby. But the boy explained that he was simply preparing for the exam, although he had to stand behind, demonstrating discipline and willingness to follow the Academy's rules. With a confident voice, Ruin declared that he would fight from exactly where he stood, emphasizing his determination and willingness to confront the monster without taking a step back. After all, his spells are significantly different from ordinary ones, possessing unusual power and effect, which makes his combat techniques much different. But the knight noted that he would not be able to help Ruin then, emphasizing that this was no ordinary orc, but an ogre, and that joking with such an opponent was extremely dangerous. He wondered why Ruin dared to risk his own life like that, because every step towards the monster could turn into mortal danger. However, Ruin did not answer the question, only silently began to prepare for battle, concentrating on tuning his magic and preparing to confront the powerful ogre. Ruin turned to his interlocutor and briefly said that he was simply determined, emphasizing his confidence and readiness to boldly enter into a dangerous battle with the ogre. The knight concludes that the young magician does not feel fear at all because his determination and calmness during preparation for battle indicate unusual courage and confidence. Professor Heidel sternly orders the student to prepare for the duel, emphasizing that it is time to show all his strength, skill, and willingness to confront the ogre. After all, his exam is about to begin, and every minute is crucial, so Ruin must fully concentrate to pass the test successfully. At that moment, the shackles that bound the ogre suddenly collapsed, and the huge monster unleashed its power freely, ready for battle. Like lightning, Ruin's opponent approaches in an instant, his massive body rushing at incredible speed, ready to deliver a devastating blow. However, the young man, preparing his attack, does not lose a single drop of confidence. His gaze is calm and his movements are clear, demonstrating his determination to confront a huge opponent. The knights could not understand what exactly the apprentice was doing, because without hesitation he simply rushed straight at the ogre. His determination and courage looked incredibly bold. The knights shouted at him from behind, demanding that he stop, because they understood how dangerous his reckless dash straight at the ogre could be, but the young man did not listen. Ruin ignores their cries and continues his determined charge towards the ogre, fully focused on the fight and confident in his own powers and spells. casts a fire sphere spell, releasing a flaming projectile with extreme force and accuracy that races straight at the ogre. Ruin meets the ogre one-on-one, standing fearlessly before the huge opponent, ready to test all his strength, skill, and spells. The atmosphere was extremely tense, as no one knew whether the young man would be able to win, and everyone present held their breath as they watched the fight begin. The knights realized that Ruin Ardell had used a close combat spell, as his movements became extremely fast and precise, and his attack was aimed directly at the ogre. Professor Heidel sat tensely, his eyes carefully following Ruin's every move, for even the slightest mistake could cost the young man defeat or injury. All the students also couldn't take their eyes off each other, watching Ruin's every move with fascination, as the duel with the mighty ogre kept them in suspense from beginning to end. Professor Ellick could not believe his eyes and was amazed by the power of Ruin's spell, as the young man demonstrated extraordinary skill and control over magic during combat. The knights saw that the student of the Magic Academy had launched an attack on the ogre, but they could not determine whether he remained alive after this risky step. In front of them was a thick layer of dust, through which practically nothing could be seen, and their vision became zero, creating a sense of chaos and complete unpredictability of the battle. When everything cleared up, the knights were surprised to realize that Ruin was still standing, despite the dangerous battle, demonstrating incredible resilience and courage. Professor Heidel said not a word, watching the events with deep concentration, for he was both surprised and troubled by what he saw. The knight touched the young man's shoulder, as if not believing in the reality of what was happening, and his movement betrayed surprise and undisguised admiration for Ruin's unyielding determination. He said that it was necessary to immediately report the danger, because the student almost died, and such a hidden threat could have cost him his life at a critical moment in the battle. To this, the young gentleman sincerely apologized, admitting his recklessness and realizing that his underestimation of the situation could have put Ruin in mortal danger. But he explained that at that moment they would not have allowed him to act like that, and even if Ruin had taken the risk, the combatants would have had to intervene to prevent mortal danger. However, there is no time for conversation now, as the exam must be completed, and everyone present must focus on ensuring that Ruin can successfully prove his skill and strength. The ogre is burning with anger, his huge body vibrating with rage, and his eyes shining with hatred, preparing to deliver a devastating blow to anyone who stands in his way. The knight shouted to Ruin to step back, as it was extremely dangerous, and even with his strength, confronting the mighty ogre was extremely risky for the young mage. He asked him to stay away while they dealt with the ogre, because any carelessness could lead to serious danger. Ruin Ardell, ignoring the warnings, took a decisive step forward, demonstrating his courage and determination to engage in a dangerous battle with the mighty ogre, despite the risk. He explained that this was his exam, and he was the one who had to pass the test, demonstrating his own skills and strength, even if it meant going up against a huge ogre. So he called for giving him the opportunity to finish what he had started, because right now he had to demonstrate his skill, determination, and to overcome the enemy. Ruin felt complete surprise and confusion, because a huge ogre, 5 times bigger than him, suddenly appeared before him, and the young man could not understand how this was possible. That there was an opponent against whom he would now have to fight. But 2 reasons inspired courage in him. Firstly, an unwavering faith in his own strength, and secondly, the desire to prove to himself and everyone that he was capable of overcoming even the huge ogre that stood before him. Thanks to his skills, Ruin understood what the ogre was saying and felt that he was afraid, because he found himself among powerful magicians and brave knights, which instilled in the young man confidence in his own abilities. The second reason was the promise of a wonderful reward for having to perform the same repetitive task every day. Therefore, Ruin had no reason to hesitate, for his confidence was based on his own skills, his ability to understand the frightened ogre, and the tempting promise of reward for his daily labor. So, confident in his abilities and encouraged by both reasons, Ruin resolutely directs his attack on his huge opponent, without hesitation for a moment. The ogre looked extremely evil and menacing, his massive figure and angry gaze making even the bravest tremble before him. At the same time, he stepped on Ruin with his huge figure, which forced the young man to act with utmost caution. The status window in front of Ruin displayed the objective he had already completed, as his fist had hit the enemy, confirming the effectiveness of his actions in battle. Looking at the student, the ogre angrily declared that he was going to kill him, radiating a dangerous threat with his huge figure and fierce anger. Suddenly, the enemy rises into the air, preparing for a powerful attack on Ruin, his huge figure looming menacingly, instilling fear in even the bravest. Rising into the air to attack, he looked down on the people, radiating dominance and fierce menace, as if arbiter of the fate of those who dared to oppose him. From above, the ogre angrily declared again that he would break Ruin's head. His words sounded threatening, and the huge figure loomed over the young man, ready to strike. Suddenly, it descends to the ground with immense force, shaking the ground beneath it and creating a dangerous threat to Ruin, who must dodge to survive. The boy realizes that in order to survive and win, he needs to find his enemy's weak spot, carefully watching the ogre's movements and thinking through his every move. And using time refraction, he slows down the ogre's movements to deliver a more precise blow and gain the advantage. The knight could not understand where Ruin got such incredible speed from, watching the young man maneuver around the ogre using time refraction to avoid blows. The young man realizes that for a successful strike he needs to approach the enemy even faster, using every moment while the ogre is confused and not expecting his maneuvers. So he starts moving even faster, combining lightning-fast maneuvers and time warping to approach the ogre unnoticed and exploit his weak spot. Ruin, assessing the situation and discovering the enemy's weak point, resolutely decides to strike the ogre at a vulnerable point, directing all his strength and accuracy into this critical blow. The knights observe Ruin's actions and realize that he did not tremble before the ogre, and they also wonder who this young man is, capable of so confidently confronting such a powerful opponent. The students, watching the battle, also could not understand what was happening, marveling at Ruin's skill and courage in the face of a huge and fiercely evil ogre. Ruin notices that the opponent is starting to actively fight back and quickly assesses his movements, preparing to adjust his strike so as not to lose his chance at victory. Their fight was extremely tense, every move by Ruin and the ogre fraught with danger, and the air around them seemed filled with tension and anticipation of the decisive moment. So the young gentleman decides to kick his opponent's arm, hoping to weaken his opponent and gain the upper hand in this extremely tense fight. But he instantly grabs his limb, demonstrating his strength and threat, and Ruin has to quickly find a new way to free himself and continue the attack. The ogre flips the young man over with a sharp movement, and he seems to be suspended in the air, sensing danger and forced to instantly look for a way to hold on and avoid the blow. The young gentleman loses his balance, hanging in the air after a sharp turn, and tries to quickly regain control of his body so as not to find himself in an even more dangerous situation. But gathering his thoughts and focusing, Ruin lands abruptly on his feet, regaining his balance and readiness to continue the fight with the monster. At that moment, the ogre attacks him again, advancing swiftly and trying to take advantage of any opportunity to hit Ruin and gain the advantage in battle. The hero instantly moved to the side and successfully blocked the attack, using his speed and agility to avoid the dangerous blow and stay in the fight. To this, the ogre angrily replied that the young man was a nimble rat, acknowledging his speed and agility, but still determined to win. So Ruin, regardless of the monster's words, resolutely decides to attack, directing all his strength and agility into a new blow to gain an advantage in the fight. Gathering all his strength and skills, he concentrates on preparing a powerful attack, combining speed, accuracy, and strategic thinking to hit the ogre in his weak spot. Ruin attacks his opponent from above, using all his strength and agility, and knocks the ogre off his feet, gaining a temporary advantage in a fierce fight. Now he stands with his feet on the ogre's chest, keeping him under control and preparing for the next blow, demonstrating courage and skill in battle. Ruin decides to end it by using his Fire Rage skill, directing destructive energy directly at his opponent to finish the battle. Suddenly, the ogre turns to Ruin and, observing his courage and strength, asks if he is even human, not hiding his surprise and some fear of the young man. To this, Ruin responds with calm confidence, something that the opponent did not expect at all, causing him a real shock. After all, the ogre realizes that Ruin is really talking to him, understanding every word the young man says, which amazes him even more and intensifies his sense of shock and surprise. The guy, without wasting time, instantly uses an explosive burning mana, directing it at the ogre with incredible force to deliver a powerful and devastating blow. And then he continues to use his skills, combining speed, strength, and magic to maintain his advantage and not give his opponent any chance to recover. Lava seemed to spill out into the middle of the field, enveloping the opponent in a fiery element and dealing him a powerful blow that made him feel a real threat. Ruin strikes the monster's face with a sharp and precise movement, inflicting severe pain on the opponent and shifting the balance of the fight in his favor. Strawn, observing the fight, says that the master did much better than he expected, acknowledging Ruin's skill and courage in the face of the huge ogre. All the observers around could not believe that the young magician was able to defeat such a powerful opponent, marveling at his strength, agility, and skill in battle. The students, amazed by Ruin's feat, began shouting words of congratulations and admiration for the young man, paying tribute to his courage and incredible victory. Professor Ellick held back his anger, unable to believe his eyes that his student had been able to deal with such a powerful opponent, and his heart was filled with a combination of amazement and incomprehension. However, Tryon Ignis looked ahead with a slight smile, as his pupil had single-handedly defeated the ogre, dovandfshi his skill, courage, and maturity in battle. And although it seemed that it was simply impossible, Ruin was still able to cope with the powerful monster, pokazavshi incredible strength, agility, and determination even in the most difficult situation. The knight approaches Ruin, watching him closely, and asks who taught him to fight so skillfully, marveling at his skill and agility in battle with the mighty ogre. But the pupil replies that he learned on his own, and his words cause real shock in the man, reflected on his face, who did not expect such independence. Ruin said this with complete confidence, and his determination shocked the knight even more, emphasizing the young man's strength of character and independence. He turned to Professor Heidel and calmly asked about his results, awaiting his grades after the incredible battle with the ogre he had just defeated. But due to his own confusion, the man could not utter a single word, frozen in the face of the young man's incredible achievement and confidence. He finally says that he didn't even think Ruin could do it, and yet the young man managed it himself, without giving him any chance to help him, which further emphasizes his skill. Once again, Ardell exceeded all of Professor Heidel's expectations, and his skills, determination, and courage far exceeded any of his mentor's predictions. So, gathering his courage, the man loudly exclaimed that Ruin Ardell had successfully passed the exam, recognizing his incredible abilities and courage in fighting the mighty ogre. Hearing these words, the young gentleman smiled lightly, feeling relieved and proud of his own success and victory over his opponent. Ruin understands that he has received the player's mysterious eye as a reward, but despite this, he has no idea of its true purpose and hidden power. When Strawn explains that from now on his master has officially become a real player, he is surprised to realize that the eye he received opens a new path in his destiny. Strawn reports that he is well aware of this unique skill, as it can only be possessed by someone who has truly earned the right to be called a true player. Enemies that hide themselves with magic will now be visible to Ruin, as Ziavladamitsa, there is a faint, glowing outline around their silhouettes, making it clear how useful this ability is. A new message also appears in the status window indicating that a mini-map has been unlocked for Ruin, capable of showing the terrain and nearby enemies. Strawn explains that thanks to it, Ruin will be able to see everything that is happening within a radius of 500 meters around him, including enemies and obstacles. Ruin also gains the ability to view the selected target's status window, allowing him to learn about its strength, skills, and level of danger. The bear orders its master to use the player's eye and look at the defeated ogre with it to test the new capabilities and verify their strength. So Ruin, feeling excited and somewhat unsure, tries to use his newly acquired skill for the first time, directing its power at the fallen ogre. The guy quickly realizes that thanks to the player's eye, he can see the target's condition, assess its health, strength, and obtain other important information about the opponent.